Hello everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. I'm Pro Elios, joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing, and this is our team preview of the San Francisco Shock going into Season 5 of the Overwatch League. Now, we are super hyped to talk about this team because we think they are going to be making a pretty big resurgence. But before we get into their actual roster, we do have to acknowledge the fact that Super has retired from professional Overwatch. And we can't talk about the professional Overwatch scene these days without really thinking of Super, who has been the face of the Overwatch League and professional Overwatch for, I think, around 4 years now. So, an absolute goat of the scene, an amazing streamer, an amazing player, and just a fantastic personality. He will be missed, but I think we will see him in some co-streams and making some guest appearances here and there in the league. So at least we'll still get to interact with him to some level on the Overwatch League stage, you know. So what are your general like? What will you miss about Super the most, Nightwing?
I think as a fan of the Overwatch League, as well as a fan personally of Super, I think it's hard to really say whether I will miss his level of gameplay and his skill level more, or whether I'll miss his personality, his leadership, and just his effect on the Overwatch scene more. I think it's probably the personality because you have many great players in Overwatch, but you don't have a personality that's quite like Super's. Um, he was incredibly positive at times. He's also competitive. You, you just get really invested into the game when you're like looking at a player like Super. I think that's what made him the sort of face of the league and even the face of the game as a whole. um, After the game has sort of started declining in popularity, considering like every large streamer had left, and it was pretty much just Super there along with some other names like Emongs and Flats. So I think in that sense, I think Super is very irreplaceable, despite his replacement coming into the shock, and yeah, he'll be missed. I do want to talk about the shock though, so let's get into that.
Yep, and let's kick things off with the guy coming in to replace Super on that tank role, and that is Coluge. Now, Coluge is an off-tank player who had been playing in NA contenders for a while, with teams like American Tornado and Dark Mode NA. And fun fact is that he's a co-founder of the Goats roster and the Goats composition, and he played Diva in the original Goats comp, and since then I think that has been his best hero. And from what I've seen, he has great awareness and great matrix usage, so just a fantastic all-round diva. He also plays Zarya and Sigma to a fairly high level, uh, but I think my main concern is that he's not really known to play main tank heroes, which I think we can say for most players in the Overwatch League scene. Uh, but I think after catching a glimpse of what tanks are going to be like, I think Coluge will be fine considering that he has a lot of, you know, good cooldown usage and cooldown management. So I think he'll still be very competitive on the roster, even though, like, let's face it, there's not going to be a suitable replacement for Super anywhere in the world. But I think the Shock have made a good pickup in Coluge, just recognizing that they need that sort of, I guess, communicative tank player, which Coluge does seem to be. So I think it's a good pickup, and I think he will be a good fit for the team. What about you, Nightwing?
I think what I will give Coluge merit for is the fact that he's been an incredibly consistently strong player in the NA region, even if he hasn't made it to uh, Overwatch League before this, because of certain controversies he's had, and you know things like that have been relatively sorted. People have been stating that he's matured, so hopefully that's true, because obviously your word for saying that you've matured is only good until your next upcoming offense, right? So uh, that's, I think, still relative. I think his position as a leader obviously will not be the same as Super's. Super had a lot of veteran experience in the Overwatch League and dealing with the shock with the coaching staff. That's, I think, something that Coluge will struggle to fulfill. That said, as a tank on his lonesome, if you look at him just as a normal rookie prospect, I think he's fairly good. I think he's one of the tanks you would put up there in terms of coming from the NA region, uh, alongside Reiner and his teammate formerly Falls. Uh, I think Coluge will do better than Falls just because he's on a better team. That said, I think, like I said on the Vancouver Titans review, I think the skill levels are quite similar in my eyes. I think Coluge might edge it out slightly in terms of individual skill, but they're quite similar. I think it's really just up to the Shock to mold him into a player that's bigger than what he sort of came into the league with. He sort of has to be bigger than the sum of his parts while working with the rest of the team. And I hope Kalush can do that. I hope that he, you know, works cordially with the rest of the team. I hope he's able to establish good comms with them because the only veteran presence they've got at the moment on the Shock is Violet. So players like Kalush will have to step up and sort of understand that veteran perspective, even if they haven't experienced it themselves. So yeah, I think it's going to be a rough ride for him trying to manage every hero, uh, despite however skilled he might be. So hopefully they can work that out.
Hmm. And moving on to the DPS line, let's kick things off with Sam, who is a flex DPS coming in from Redbird Esports. And Sam has a deep hero pool and seems to be fieldable in any meta, just because of how much playtime he's got throughout the years. And his playstyle is kind of like really very opportunistic. He tends to play very conservatively until he spots any positioning errors or overutilization of cooldowns from the enemy team, and then starts playing more aggressively. I've seen him doing that, especially on the Genji a lot, and it usually leads to great results. And even though I don't think he's got that carry potential, he has consistently been part of top three teams in any contenders for the past couple of years. So he's definitely doing something right. And I think he has the potential to be a surprisingly good pickup, especially considering that he has synergy with Coluge from playing in any contenders. So that could be a plus point, considering that, you know, there needs to be some form of pre-existing synergy, I think, if you want to extract value out of players that aren't really known to pop off individually. So the communication aspect really comes into play. So if you can utilize that well, you can make up for that lack of explosiveness. So yeah, any thoughts on Sam Nightwing?
Yeah, I think the playstyle that you mentioned, I think, is also perfect for the Echo because that's another hero that you sometimes have to play like an assassin with. Um, because you have to find, those shortcomings. You have to find when a player goes down to 50% HP and then you have to beam them down when they're not getting their team support. So that coincidentally happens to be one of Sam's better heroes. And I think a hero that you'll see him play often in the Overwatch League. So I think he's still well suited to be a part of the DPS line. I don't think he will be the carry, but I think he should fit in quite well whenever any sort of projectile gameplay is required.
Hmm. And the Shock have also signed two DPS from O2 Blast, which is the contenders team that they have partnered with in this off season, and they've brought in Kilo and Proper, who are two absolutely god tier DPS brought in from Korean contenders. And I think I'll let you talk about these guys first, Nightwing. What are your general thoughts on them?
Uh, I think for me, I would say Proper definitely fits that god tier DPS bill for me. Kilo maybe not so much because while he is exceptionally talented at that hit scan and at his peaks he is insane. Like the kid is cracked. That said, I think sometimes he's just not very consistent, and uh, it's just the fact that he is not exceptionally flexible outside of those hit scan heroes that I think you'll see him fulfill sort of a similar role to what DM did on the Shanghai Dragons, where you would only come in for the hit scan, right? So I think that just makes it hard for people to see like how gifted he is, because you can only play sniper heroes in particular compositions and in particular contexts, right? Whereas proper is the kind of DPS you really want going into Overwatch 2. He's insanely mechanically talented, and he's probably going to be Rookie of the Year in my eyes, just because of how insanely good he is at a multitude of heroes. He's really good at the hit scans, he's really good at the projectile heroes, and he's really good on the Tracer, especially. And I think that makes him a very viable candidate to be one of the best DPS going into this uh, league, or at least the best by far rookie DPS going into this season, because you need a hero you need a player that can pick up multiple heroes and has existing perfection with basically every hero. And I think he's just kind of that example of a hyper flex who can do it all, similar to established players in the league who have built up their hero pool over many years, like Fleta or Profit, etc. So I think Proper is going to fit in really, really well and be the carry for this SF Shock. I would like to see him pretty much put in at all times. Uh, I think unless there's a major, mental break that he has, or some other kind of like health issue or some synergy issue with the team, there's almost no reason to take Proper out of this roster at any time.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm also a huge fan of Proppers. Like, the guy had been with O2 Blast for around 3 years and won multiple seasons of contenders with them as well. And he also had a lot of second place finishes and a few third place finishes. So he's generally won a ton of accolades for this team. And I remember a time when he and Pelican used to form their DPS line, and it's like knowing how good Pelican is. Naturally, he won Rookie of the Year last year. It's it's kind of scary to imagine them playing together at this point, but unfortunately, they're on separate teams. That said, proper, like you said, Nightwing will definitely be like a carry player for this team. And I think Kilo, even though he's, like you said, inconsistent, I think a lot of people are sleeping on how good he is. Because I think he's a fantastic aimer and he's comfortable on all traditional hit scan heroes. So even if his use is kind of niche, like I wouldn't even say niche, even though his usage might be limited for the shock, I think he's going to be a really like amazingly strong player. So all in all, like a great pick up from by the San Francisco Shock, and I think Kilo and Propo are just the kind of explosive players they need to kind of uh, like bolster their damage line once again and start climbing all the way to the top, you know. And let's move on now to the support line. Starting off with another player picked up from O2 Blast, which is Finn. He is a flex support player and naturally has synergy with Kilo and Proper. And all in all, I think he's got really good mechanics and awareness and will be the Ana player for this team since Wild for some reason can't play Ana. And Super had also said on one of his streams that Finn is absolutely cracked. So I feel like he will be very close to that god tier of flex support play. But I doubt that he'll be better than Violet. I think it'll take a lot to cross that threshold. But I still think he'll be a really good player. What about you, Nightwing?
I think while it might be hard for Finn to fill in the shoes of peak Violet from season 3, where he was just playing Zen out of his mind. That said, I think Finn at the current moment might just be better than Violet, at least on the flex support role, just because of the fact that Violet will probably have to play the Brig or even the Lucio. Sadly, at times, just because this team does not have a real main support. And so this year, I think you could definitely see Finn being better than Violet on the flex support specifically, and definitely on the Ana. Uh, so I think, yeah, I think I quite agree with Super. I think there's a very real possibility that Finn could come into this year and be like a top 3 flex support almost. But I think it's going to require an insane amount of luck and an insane amount of choking and sandbagging from every other flex support in the league. So I think it's still unlikely, but there's a small chance that does take place, because Finn is incredibly good mechanically. He supports his team very well. He's always positioned really well. He doesn't really have like a very common like first death statistic. He's always there where you like need him, and I think he's going to be probably the mainstay flex support for this roster. And you'll have to see Violet, despite his own flex support just legacy, you'll have to see Violet play most of the main support roles. Unless things really change and you want to put in maybe like Finn on the Mercy and then Violet on the Zen. But I think that's slightly unlikely. And I think you'd probably see Finn fix that flex support role. What do you think?
I think it's going to be a matter of the meta, because um, like in general, since Overwatch 2 is going to be more mechanics oriented, we don't even know how popular heroes like Lucio and Brig are going to be. But considering that a lot of players have said that supports are generally very vulnerable because there's no off tank specifically assigned to peel for them, I think there might be some use for heroes like Lucio and Brig and Mercy. That said, I think if there are teams that are more comfortable mechanically and know that they can out aim their opponents, there's no reason why they wouldn't opt in for that double flex support composition, kind of like the direction the Shock are taking, and like just try and win that way, you know. So I can totally see the Shock just not playing main support heroes a lot, and even though like they do have two flex supports, I think it could be either one of them switching. I think if it's Zen or Bap at the core, they would probably want Violet on that role because like his Zen was bonkers in season two, as well as season three, and like although it hit a slight slump last year, it's still really good. And Violet's Bap and Moira are also top notch. So even though he filled in for some main support roles last year, he didn't do too great on them. So I don't think he'll be forced into those roles if he's not really that good on them. But I still feel like he's going to be one of the top supports going into Overwatch 2, and Finn is a fantastic rookie prospect as well. So it just depends on what Crusty thinks and the coaching staff think in general. And yeah, I think we can just start talking about them, Nightwing, unless you have more thoughts on the supports.
Yeah, I think just one thing that I would like to mention is that I would really love to see a actual main support player signed to this roster, because at times that Violet Lucio was just tragic to watch, and I think that probably is the plan in case heroes like Brig or like Lucio become meta, because even though it's a new game and there's a lot of flux happening, you also can end up with a situation where, because it's a new game, heroes are not very balanced at the moment, especially with the reports coming out of the alpha currently. um, so you may just end up in a situation where you are compulsorily playing that Brig, playing that Lucio, and that's a situation where the Shock don't want to find themselves in, because I don't think that Violet on main support is really the answer, especially when some other teams have signed, great rookies on main support, or they've got a lot of good established players on main support. Especially, for example, if you're the SF Shock, you go against the Gladiators. You've got Funny Astro and Lucio on their end, then you've got Violet on Lucio on your end. Who do you think is going to win, right? So I would really love to see them sign another support just to round this insanely good flex support line out as well. That said, yeah, I think we can go to the coaching staff. Would you like to start us off on them?
Sure. So the Shock once again have Crusty as their head coach, and all I want to say is I believe, guys. Even after a slightly rough season 4, I believe Crusty is one of the biggest masterminds in the Overwatch coaching scene. He has worked magic with his franchise, and I believe he can do it again because he's picked up some rather nutty players to join them in their first season in Overwatch 2, and they all seem to be really coachable and talented right from the get go. So, like, we've all seen what Krusty can do with star talent. He has won 2 seasons of the Overwatch League with them, and I'll just never stop praying at the Church of Crusty. I feel like the guy has insane potential, and he has proven himself time and time again to be really competent and smart. So I think he can mold this team into a championship caliber roster once again. What are your thoughts on him, Nightwing?
I think obviously Krusty has a lot of pedigree and a lot of achievements, and it's always good to acknowledge them. That said, I think sometimes he does just get a bit full of himself, where he tries to make do with the players that he has instead of signing new players mid-season. And I think that's something that sort of hurt them last year, is where they tried to reintegrate Arns instead of finding good rookie prospects. And I think here in this season, it seems like Krusty is still a little full of himself, just a little bit, because he obviously it's good to have faith in your players, but you're not giving Coluge a backup to fall back upon. You're not giving Violet an actual main support, and sort of almost forcing him to play those main support heroes most likely, if they become compulsory, as the meta dictates. And I think that's where you might see some of Krusty's church just start to become a little bit uh, a victim of heresy almost, because while yes, he's gotten back NineK as well, who made a really good team in season 3, and they will definitely be bolstered by that. I think Krusty is still at the helm, and I think they have to work with the GM as well as the probably extremely high budget of NRG to sign some more players to round out this roster. I think last year you could see that there were some times in which the appropriate substitutions for Super and Smurf were not coming in. You could see that FD God was not being coached very properly. He was quite disconnected from the rest of the team, and you could hear that there were um, just a lot of miscommunications happening in the shock last year. And I think that may continue into this year until this team sort of gets its head on straight. And that's really my fear, because obviously you can look at Krusty's past achievements and snort that copium all day, but uh, the fact of the matter is that they did not do quite well in uh, season 4, even if they did do acceptably. I think this is a team that has to look at that three-peat, has to look at that championship title. It's not really an expectation for them to just do okay in semifinals. I think they have to compete with those top teams in order to reach the championship. And this team has some holes where other teams have none. So I think that's what I'm really afraid about.
So I do get the sentiment, and I do think that this team has the potential to really, you know, I feel like they are vulnerable on certain fronts, like you said, like not having a main support or a backup tank for Coluge. But I feel like the team does have a lot of potential, especially with 9K returning to the team. Like he's rejoining the Shock after 2 years, and like the team was so fantastic while he was working with Krusty on it, right? Like they were almost untouchable when we saw this duo coaching the team, and like 9K rejoining the Shock after 2 years, kind of he feels like the guy who spends a few years trying out different jobs but realizes that there's nothing like his family business. So the boys back home, the family is together, and I think with their new foster kids, they can work some magic over here. I'm just really hopeful about this team looking at the talent that they've signed. And they've also got Casores, of course, who has been with the Shock since the preseason of 2020. He spent a year as an analyst, I believe, then became an assistant coach. And even though I don't know the general impression of him out there, I'd heard him talk during one of SVB's podcasts, and he seemed pretty knowledgeable. So even based off of just one episode, I felt like he's a smart and reliable guy. So don't see any problem there. And all in all, I just feel like this team has the potential to bag a championship if they don't let the vulnerabilities become their weaknesses. I feel like if the team just kind of perfects their signature heroes or perfects a play style, kind of like the Atlanta Reign did last year, they can like be really solid, and like they all seem like really coachable players. So I feel like they can reach for the stars and go for the championship run here. What do you think, Nightwing?
So I think my main concern is that the first of all, like I said, uh, the roster still needs to be rounded out a little bit more, and the Shock definitely have the resources to do it. They don't need to, sign literally the league minimum, similar to the LA Valiant, right? They've got resources. They should sign them and make the most out of this new game. Uh, and I feel like they're just not doing that for reasons I don't particularly understand. I'm seriously hoping that going into the next tournament cycle, uh, they will find players that are doing exceptionally in Overwatch 2 and then actually make signings, because relying on only these six players is probably not the way to go, especially since that's also what Crusty is used to, right? He is not just used to coaching like a very tightly knit roster. He's coached like a very large roster, and he's made appropriate substitutions when the Shock have actually won, right? It's when he gets stuck with certain players hero pools is when the Shock kind of finds their downfall. And you saw this in season 4. You could see in season 3 that the substitutions between Super and Smurf, as well as some of the other DPS players, is what gave the Shock a lot of flexibility. They had basically comps downloaded in their heads, and a particular roster downloaded in their heads for particular maps, and that's why they excelled on maps like Kings Row, where they would come in with that broad comp, and then they would swap over to Hanamura with Smurf coming in, and they would have that excellent dive. I think Rusty is used to and excels with a large roster, and they just don't have that here, is one of my main fears.
Yeah, that is a really good point actually. Like I do remember that Krusty's like major successes came when he did have a set of options to choose from among the set of players he had. Uh, Maybe it's just my respect for Krusty, like making me say that they could be a championship roster. But I do genuinely believe it is possible in this context. There's no particular reasoning for it. It's just that I think like almost all of the roles have some legends on them, and like with some bombastic playmaking potential in the hands of players like Proper, sometimes Kalo, Violet naturally on Zen and Bap, and even Finn now that he's been brought in. Uh, there's a whole lot of scope for the Shock to get back to a state in which all of their players have some potential to carry, because that's what happened back when they were playing goats, even back when they were playing the season 2 finals with double shield comps. Like all of their players were absolutely fantastic on each of their roles, and I think that's what they need to focus on here, because the Shock have never been particularly good when they've tried to adapt to the meta, and when they've tried to copy others. They've been good at defining the meta, they've been good at forcing others to play what they play, and then just outplaying them on those compositions. And I believe they can do that with the set of players that they have, force the others to play their own game and then just beat them at it. So it just remains to be seen. A lot of this is quite speculative naturally, but I believe it's going to be an interesting season for them nonetheless. And I think that about rounds up my thoughts on the Shock. Anything else to add, Nightwing, before we close this episode?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm really, really excited to see players like Proper, like Kilo, be introduced into the field. And I genuinely do think players like Proper can definitely be the Rookie of the Year, because individually, he is like extremely, extremely good. If the team is even moderately successful, I think he'll stand out immensely. And I just really want this team to get that championship, honestly. So that's why I want their roster to be rounded out a little bit better. Hopefully, though, the players can show their flexibility and flourish.
All right, and on that note, we will end this episode of the Overseers. Thanks a lot to anyone that's been watching and listening so far. We really appreciate it. And we would love to hear your thoughts on the San Francisco Shock as well, because I think even Nightwing and I disagreed on some points. So we would love to hear all of your perspectives and try and respond to them as well when we can. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next team preview, which will be about the Houston Outlaws. Bye bye.